Ashley leaned against the kitchen counter in her office, casually stirring her third coffee of the day. Outside, the sun was dipping lower in the sky, streaking the downtown skyline with shades of gold that made the buildings look almost alive. Around her, the chatter of her colleagues discussing their after-work plans filled the air. She smiled faintly as her friend Brittany gave her a playful nudge. "Come on, Ashley. Just one drink." "It's Thursday," Brittany teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Ashley paused for a heartbeat. She and Matthew had gone over this so many times before. No more late-night escapades, no more hanging out at bars while he stayed at home, restless and stewing in his own doubts. She'd promised him she'd stop, swore up and down her wild nights were a thing of the past. But those promises felt distant now, like they belonged to someone else. Tonight, a familiar itch stirred deep inside her, a longing for the energy, the chaos, and the thrill of the crowd. Matthew never really got it, and she doubted he ever would. For her, the bar wasn't just a place to drink or dance. It was freedom, a chance to shake off the monotony of being a wife and feel alive again. Ashley was a people person, someone who thrived on interaction and connection. She could turn a stranger's passing glance into a moment they'd remember. At the bar, she wasn't just Matthew's wife. She was someone electric, someone she hadn't felt like in a long time. A sly smile crept across her lips. "All right," she said, putting her mug down with a soft clink. "Just one drink." Brittany cheered triumphantly, grabbing her bag as they joined the group heading out. Ashley glanced at her phone. Matthew would be home by now, probably setting the table or unwinding after work. Lately, he'd been distant, cold in a way that made her feel trapped. Breaking her promise was a risk, sure, but tonight wasn't about risks or consequences. Tonight was about her. By the time they arrived at the bar, the sun had vanished, replaced by the neon glow of city lights. As they stepped inside, the familiar pulse of music and laughter embraced her, chasing away the guilt she'd carried earlier. Here, surrounded by voices and clinking glasses, Ashley felt like herself again. It didn't take long for her to become the center of attention. Her charm was magnetic. She floated effortlessly between conversations, her laughter drawing people in. At one point, Brittany leaned in, chuckling. "Ashley, you've got every guy here staring at you. What's your secret?" Ashley shrugged, her eyes dancing with amusement. "It's a talent," she said lightly. What she didn't admit was how much she enjoyed the attention. The stares, the smiles. It all made her feel wanted in a way she hadn't in years. It wasn't that she planned to act on it. Well, not usually. A small voice in her head whispered reminders of Matthew, but she shoved it aside. As the night went on, her gaze locked with a tall, confident man standing by the bar. There was something in his stance, the way he carried himself, that pulled her in. He reminded her of the excitement she used to crave, back when life hadn't felt so suffocating. Matthew's face flickered in her mind, his tired eyes, the pleading in his voice when he'd begged her to give up these nights. But Matthew wasn't here now. Tonight, her desires took the wheel. The hours slipped away like whiskey over ice. Ashley was in her element, perched at the bar with Brittany and a rotating circle of strangers. She laughed at their jokes, leaned in close during their stories, and let the alcohol blur the edges of her conscience. The promise she'd made to Matthew felt miles away, drowned out by the rush of being surrounded by admiration. One guy, Simon or Dan, she wasn't sure, lingered longer than the others. He wasn't her usual type, but his easy confidence and sharp humor made her curious. He bought her a drink, his arm brushing hers each time she laughed. She didn't move away. Why should she? It was harmless, just fun. When he handed her his phone and asked for her number, she paused for just a moment before typing it in. His grin widened as he promised to call her. She didn't bother to stop him. By the time Ashley checked the clock, the hands had already crept past midnight. Matthew waiting at home crossed her mind briefly, but instead of feeling guilty, a wave of irritation washed over her. She could practically hear his voice in her head, rattling off yet another list of reasons why tonight was a glaring example of her lack of responsibility. He always acted like he had the moral high ground, like his predictability was some kind of badge of honor. Honestly, she thought, He was just boring. A man who confused routine for maturity. She dismissed the thought with a shake of her head, finished the last sip of her drink, and reminded herself the night wasn't over yet. She still had time to soak it all in. Tomorrow's workload didn't feel urgent. Her job report could wait. Fridays were her work-from-home days, an easy routine of typing up reports and taking calls on her laptop. It wasn't until close to 2:30 a.m. that she decided she'd reached her limit. The pleasant buzz in her head was still there, and though her steps were steady, she knew she was nearing the edge between tipsy and overdoing it. When someone offered her another round, she waved it off and started gathering her things. "You're sure you're calling it a night? Simon? Or was it Dan?" Leaned in, his voice warm and laced with playful teasing. "There's a great little spot I know. Just us two." Ashley flashed her practiced, dazzling smile. "Tempting, but I'll pass this time. Maybe another night." Whether there would ever be another night was doubtful, but she'd long since perfected the art of graceful rejection. He grinned, nodded, and stepped aside, giving her room to slip on her coat and head for the door. Outside, she flagged down a taxi. The ride home was uneventful, the city streets nearly deserted, and the quiet gave her thoughts room to grow louder. She started playing out how the inevitable argument with Matthew might unfold, but the idea didn't bother her. If anything, the alcohol gave her a boldness she rarely felt when he was around. "What's his angle going to be this time?" she mused, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Another sermon about respect? About trust? Spare me." In her mind, she ran through her comebacks. "You don't own me, Matthew. I'm not a child. I work hard, and I deserve to blow off steam." She almost laughed out loud at the imagined exchange, her confidence building as the taxi neared their quiet suburban neighborhood. "Go ahead, try me. I'll shut you down so fast, you won't know what hit you." When the cab rolled to a stop in front of their house, she felt a small wave of relief. The place was dark, confirmation that she wouldn't have to face Matthew's brooding right away. Fishing her keys from her bag, she pushed the door open and stepped inside, her heels clicking against the tile floor. The silence hit her immediately, and she realized the house wasn't just dark, it was empty. Matthew wasn't home. For a moment, she stood frozen, her drink-clouded brain trying to piece together the unusual scene. Then, a slow, playful grin spread across her face. "Bingo," she said aloud, her voice echoing in the stillness of the living room. Kicking off her heels, she collapsed onto the couch, stretching out like she owned the place. No lectures, no judgmental looks, no guilt trips about promises she'd never really intended to keep. Just her, the quiet, and the satisfying knowledge that she was living life exactly as she wanted. And yet, a flicker of curiosity stirred in the back of her mind. Matthew's absence was unusual, and though she was enjoying the freedom, part of her couldn't help but wonder where he might be. "Probably sulking at one of his friends' places," she muttered with a wry grin. Still, the thought lingered. It nagged at her enough that she got up, a little unsteady, and wandered through the house. She checked the bedroom, the office, and the bathroom. All empty. Even the garage was void of his car. It was strange. Matthew hardly ever left without texting her, even after an argument. A faint unease tried to creep in, but she shrugged it off. When she walked into the kitchen, her steps faltered. There, under the dim glow of the nightlight, sat three objects on the table. A neat stack of divorce papers, a small box holding his engagement ring, and a folded letter. Her heart skipped a beat before she shook her head and laughed. "Oh, this is just priceless," I muttered, striding toward the table. I snatched up the stack of papers, squinting at them under the faint kitchen light. A sharp laugh escaped me, echoing off the walls. "Matthew, you've really outdone yourself this time," I said, flipping through the pages with exaggerated flair. "Blackmail? Emotional theatrics? Is this your grand plan to get me to fall in line?" I slapped the papers back onto the table with a flourish and glared at the ring in its little box. As if this means anything now. Then my eyes fell on the letter. With an exaggerated sigh, I unfolded it, leaning against the counter like a performer ready to take center stage. But as I began to read, the words hit harder than I expected. "Ashley, I've spent countless sleepless nights trying to figure out how to mend what's broken between us, but I've come to realize I can't fix this alone. Your behavior has become intolerable, and you've abandoned the promises you made. I loved you, Ashley. I still do. But love needs respect, trust, and shared effort, things you no longer seem willing to give. You disregard my feelings as though they're insignificant. You say one thing and do another, leaving me shattered. I know how you've been spending your nights. I know about the bars, the flirting, and the way you allow other men into spaces that should belong to us. It's the most devastating reality of our marriage. This cannot go on. If there's any part of you that still values what we've built, meet me at the Courtyard Suites, room 217, on Maple Grove Road by 7 p.m. this Friday. If you don't, you won't see me again. I want to resolve this amicably, but be warned. I'm prepared to show you the consequences of your choices. I've left divorce papers on the table. Please review them. I hope you'll grasp the seriousness of this and the finality of my decision. The next step is yours. Matthew. My grip on the letter tightened as a strange pressure built in my chest, but I shoved the feeling aside. Fueled by alcohol and defiance, I crushed the letter in my hand and tossed it onto the floor. Go to hell, Matthew. I shouted, my voice bouncing through the empty house. You don't know a damn thing. You think this makes you better than me? My laughter came out loud and uneven, covering up the whisper of doubt that had crept into my thoughts. My eyes wandered back to the divorce papers, and a surge of indignation flared in me. He thinks he can just walk out? Who does he think he is? The thought stung, but it also fueled my defiance. I'm the queen in this house, not him. He's the one who should be begging me to stay. I started pacing the kitchen, Matthew's words tumbling through my mind. Flirting with other men? Did he know about Chris? He couldn't possibly know. That little fling had been nothing. Spur of the moment, impulsive, and not worth worrying over. Still, the idea lingered, gnawing at my confidence. I laughed again, a bit sharper this time. Well, Matthew, here's hoping you don't find out about that one, I said aloud, my tone dripping with mockery. But his ultimatum stuck with me. He sounded serious, as if this wasn't another empty threat. The thought of him truly leaving poked at my bravado, but I shoved it aside. Instead, I grabbed a glass of water and a couple of hangover pills, trying to steady the slight tilt in the room as I headed for bed. He'll come crawling back, I muttered to myself, climbing under the covers. He's just trying to scare me. He'll be begging for me soon enough. As my head hit the pillow, the room spun lazily, and exhaustion took over. My last words before drifting to sleep came out in a mutter. I don't care, Matthew. You're the one who needs to change. But even as sleep claimed me, the words rang hollow. The crumpled letter lay abandoned on the kitchen floor, a quiet reminder of the choices I hadn't yet realized would ripple through everything. The next morning, I woke around 9 a.m., the night before already feeling like a blur. As I powered up my laptop to work on a report, my eyes flicked to the divorce papers still sitting on the kitchen table. They seemed more like an annoyance than anything serious, an irritating little fly buzzing around my head. Blackmail, that's all this is, I thought with a smirk, shaking my head at the absurdity of it. Matthew just wants attention. He's hoping I'll come crawling back, begging him to stay. Fat chance. My lips curled into a satisfied grin as I pictured him sitting in some dingy motel room, watching the clock and hoping I'd burst through the door with apologies and promises. He'll crack first. He always does. He's probably pacing right now, wondering why I haven't called. Let him squirm. I opened my laptop and buried myself in work. Reports weren't exactly thrilling, but they kept my mind from circling back to Matthew's theatrics. By 4:45 p.m., though, my focus was long gone. With a sigh, I grabbed my phone and fired off a message to Brittany and a few other girlfriends. Nightclub drinks on me. Need to blow off steam. The replies came in almost instantly. I'm in. Where are we going? You okay, babe? I smiled as I typed out the details, already imagining the music, the lights, and the sharp tang of a perfectly made martini washing away the weight of Matthew's letter. By 7:50 p.m., I was lounging in the VIP section of a crowded club, perched on a velvet seat with a martini in hand. The bass thudded in my chest as I leaned into my friends, letting the alcohol loosen my tongue. "Can you believe him?" I exclaimed, the words spilling out in a rush. "He left divorce papers on the kitchen table. And a letter. What am I supposed to do, cry? Beg? Matthew thinks he can lay down an ultimatum and I'll just fold? Not happening." Brittany rolled her eyes, raising her glass in solidarity. "Girl, please. You're a queen. Matthew should be chasing you, not the other way around." Another friend chimed in, her tone dripping with confidence. "Exactly. He's lucky you even gave him the time of day. If he can't see that, let him rot in his little motel room." Their words were the balm I needed, each one bolstering the spark of rebellion in me. Fueled by their encouragement and a few too many cocktails, an idea began forming in my head. "I'll show him," I thought, swirling the last sip of my drink. "He thinks he can just walk away? Fine. I'll do the same. Except I'll have fun doing it." I scanned the room, searching for someone who could help me prove a point. Someone to remind me, and Matthew, just how desirable I still was. But the night didn't go as planned. My usual charm felt off, my confidence misaligned. The men I smiled at barely looked my way, their attention drawn elsewhere. Conversations fizzled before they even began. By 11:30 p.m., frustration had set in, replacing the earlier rush of defiance. The drinks weren't working anymore, and the club felt more suffocating than exhilarating. With a huff, I called it a night and ordered a ride home. The house was dark and unsettlingly quiet when I arrived. Tossing my heels aside, I made my way to the living room and stopped in my tracks. The emptiness hit me differently this time. There was no Matthew waiting to greet me, no disapproving frown, no glass of water to help with tomorrow's inevitable hangover. I slumped onto the couch, staring at my phone as the flicker of unease grew. Maybe I should call him, I thought reluctantly. Before I could second-guess myself, I dialed his number. The line rang and rang until it clicked over to voicemail. "To hell with you," I muttered, tossing the phone onto the coffee table. "I don't need you, Matthew. I've got this." But the words felt hollow in the heavy silence that surrounded me. When I finally crawled into bed, the alcohol buzz had faded, leaving behind a strange, unfamiliar loneliness. The next morning, I woke to the sharp ring of my phone, jolting me upright. Groggy and disoriented, I answered it with a scratchy, "Hello? Mrs. Ashley Tronder?" The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and unfamiliar. "Yes, this is she," I replied, sitting up straighter, my pulse quickening. "This is Mark Reynolds, Matthew Tronder's divorce attorney. I'm calling to confirm that you've reviewed the documents left at your residence." Ashley blinked, the fog of sleep quickly giving way to confusion. "Wait, what? You're his lawyer? Why are you calling me?" "Per Mr. Tronder's instructions, all communication will now go through me," the voice on the other end replied, calm and unyielding. "If you have questions or wish to propose any counteroffers regarding the divorce proceedings, you're welcome to contact my office. I trust you understand the gravity of the situation." Before Ashley could muster a reply, the line went dead. She stared at her phone, her chest tightening with the weight of realization. He's serious. The rest of the day spiraled out of control. When she tried transferring money from their joint account to cover her mounting credit card debt, the transaction was declined. Panicking, she opened her banking app, only to find the joint account frozen. Worse, her personal account was nearly drained, leaving only a few $100s. How did he pull this off? She thought, her heart racing. Did he plan this all along? She sank into a chair at the kitchen table, her earlier defiance crumbling under the weight of reality. Matthew wasn't bluffing. He had waited for her to make the first move, and when she hadn't, he'd acted decisively. He was gone, and somehow, he had seized control of their shared life in ways she never thought possible. For the first time, an unsettling thought crept into her mind. What if I've completely underestimated him? The divorce proceedings hit like a hurricane she hadn't seen coming. Her once unshakable confidence was rattled as it became clear Matthew hadn't been making idle threats. He had prepared for this meticulously, far more than she could have imagined. The first court session was an eye-opener. Sitting stiffly beside her attorney, Ashley listened in growing disbelief as Matthew's lawyer, Mark Reynolds, laid out his case with chilling precision. "Your Honor," Reynolds began, his tone measured and professional. "My client, Mr. Tronder, took necessary steps to safeguard himself financially after enduring years of reckless and irresponsible behavior from Mrs. Tronder." He presented a detailed financial report, showing how Matthew had transferred substantial funds from their joint accounts into accounts solely under his name months before filing for divorce. Investments in real estate and personal assets were already shielded, leaving little for Ashley to claim. Her attorney objected, calling Matthew's actions preemptive and unfair, but Reynolds had airtight documentation for every move. By the end of the session, it was painfully clear. Ashley would be walking away with far less than she had expected. Then came the next blow: evidence about her personal life. Reynolds remained calm, methodical, as he introduced a series of exhibits. "Your Honor," he said, his tone unwavering, "these materials reveal a consistent pattern of behavior that undermines Mrs. Tronder's credibility and ability to maintain a stable and respectful marriage." The evidence included damning photos of Ashley leaving bars late at night, often with unfamiliar men. Screenshots of text messages and emails showed flirtatious exchanges with several individuals. And then came the most devastating revelation: proof of her brief affair with Chris. There were hotel receipts, messages confirming their meetings, and even timestamps that left no room for doubt. Her attorney fought back, dismissing the evidence as irrelevant and invasive, but Reynolds countered with measured precision. "This evidence," he argued, "is critical to understanding the breakdown of trust in the marriage, which directly impacts the equitable division of assets." Matthew himself didn't appear in court, at least not in person. Instead, his face appeared on a monitor during virtual broadcasts. Calm, resolute, and collected, he was the polar opposite of Ashley's fraying nerves. "I trusted her," Matthew said during one such session, his voice steady but tinged with quiet disappointment. "I built a life for us, a stable, loving home, but that trust was broken, over and over again. When it became clear she wasn't going to change, I had no choice but to protect myself." Ashley sat frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. Matthew wasn't just angry or hurt. He had been strategizing, planning his escape while she dismissed his warnings as empty threats. The realization shook her more deeply than she cared to admit. Ashley's world continued to unravel as whispers began circulating at work. It wasn't long before she traced the source: an anonymous report submitted to her employer, detailing her struggles with alcohol and evidence of her infidelity. The details were too precise, too intimate, to have come from anyone but Matthew. "You've been a valuable asset, Ashley," her boss said, her tone filled with that insufferable mix of sympathy and finality. "But this kind of reputation reflects poorly on the firm. It's best if you step down quietly." The humiliation burned as Ashley packed up her desk, her co-workers' hushed voices trailing behind her like an unwanted echo. By the time she walked out of the building for the last time, her pride was in tatters. Back at the nearly empty house, she sat in silence, staring at the divorce papers that had once seemed like a cruel joke. Matthew was gone, really gone, and with him had gone the stability she hadn't realized she depended on. For the first time, she let the truth sink in. Matthew had been her anchor, the steady hand that kept her from drifting too far. Without him, the cracks in her world had widened into gaping chasms. She had lost everything: the man who had quietly stood by her, her financial security, her career, and even her dignity. But what stung the most was the realization that Matthew hadn't just walked away. He had systematically dismantled the life they'd shared while building a new one for himself, one that no longer included her. In the months after the divorce, Ashley stumbled through life in a haze of half-hearted attempts to piece herself back together. She tried reaching out to Matthew, first in anger, then desperation, and finally something resembling regret. Every attempt was met with silence. Then, one day, her lawyer forwarded her a curt message from Matthew. "I gave you a chance to talk to me openly and sincerely, but you chose to party again. I was waiting for you at 5 p.m. at the hotel. I warned you, and you thought you were a queen." The words hit her harder than she expected. For the first time, she understood that Matthew's absence wasn't a tactic or a test. It was permanent. He wasn't waiting for her to come around. He wasn't playing games. He was done. Desperate for a fresh start, Ashley threw herself into the world of dating, but the results were nothing short of disastrous. The first man she saw turned out to already be in a relationship. "It's complicated," he'd said, as if that excused his duplicity. The next seemed promising, until she discovered he was married, using her as a distraction from his crumbling home life. The thrill she used to chase felt hollow now. Every connection felt tainted, every spark dulled by the shadow of betrayal. The vibrant, magnetic woman who once lit up rooms now moved through life like a ghost. Nights at bars no longer felt exhilarating. They felt empty. The drinks didn't bring the same buzz. They only numbed the edges of her disappointment. One quiet evening, as she sat alone in her dimly lit living room, Ashley scrolled through her phone, stumbling across old photos from the life she'd left behind. There she was, standing beside Matthew. His steady, grounded presence contrasted with her sparkling energy in every shot. For the first time, she saw what she'd missed before. His patience, his unwavering reliability, his quiet, steady love. Tears welled up in her eyes, and this time, she didn't fight them. She let them fall, each one carrying the weight of a realization she could no longer deny. The life she had lost hadn't been stolen from her. It had been chipped away by her own choices, brick by brick, until there was nothing left to stand on. Ashley still clung to the idea of being a queen, but the weight of her crown was crushing, her throne empty, and the kingdom she once cherished reduced to a desolate shadow of what it had been. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel,